On the surface, Garfield appears to be a repetitive, boring, and generally uninteresting comic. A comic that has long passed the stage of beating the dead horse. In fact, the horse's body has been decaying for millions of years, and its remains have formed into fossil fuels that are being used to power the lights in the factory that produces these mediocre comics. Really, the only entertainment that can still be sucked out of Garfield are the surreal pieces of artwork that have sprung up to parody the comics. But upon looking deeper, Garfield offers so much more. After all, the series has been running for quite a long time now. So then, what is the story of Garfield? And how did the original funny cat become the eldritch horror that it is now? Let's make sure we're on the same page first. The Garfield world can be split into multiple universes. There's the comic world, comprised of the daily Garfield comics, the universe of the Garfield show, the movies, and other forms of Garfield media, and each of these universes have similarities to one another, including the same cast of characters and setting. However, the differences start to show when you look into the finer details of the world. For example, in the comics, there are numerous references to Garfield being well over 40 years old. However, in the Garfield show, the first episode establishes that he is 10 years old. I won't be sticking to any specific universe for this video, as it can get complicated due to various plot holes and inconsistencies within certain timelines. However, the general Garfield lore should carry over in most timelines. First off, Garfield has some strange abilities. He is definitely smarter than the average cat, using his intelligence to exploit his family and those around him. Just look at the fear in John's eyes when he realizes he forgot the lasagna. So we know Garfield is not a normal cat. Through the comics, he slowly evolves, transforming from a creature that kind of resembles a cat to a Khajiit from the Elder Scrolls. We also know that Garfield gets very meta. Many comics and other forms of Garfield media reference the viewer, and Garfield even meets a past version of himself. One thing that may explain these various phenomenons are the events that transpire in a series of comics from 1989. These Halloween-themed Garfield comics didn't deal with scary monsters or ghosts, but rather the scariest thing of all. The unstoppable progression of time, as it slowly pulls all of us to an unavoidable demise. In these comics, Garfield is an abandoned cat, slowly starving to death in a house long forgotten. All the events from the comics are merely illusions, while in reality Garfield is dying, or perhaps already dead. His carefree attitude is because he's in denial. He eats so much because in reality, he's starving. And the comics have gotten so bland and boring because he doesn't want to accept reality, and just keep living in this fantasy he has created. This also explains why he is sometimes meta, and can speak to past versions of himself, because these moments are small breaks in the illusion he has created. However, the creator of Garfield states that these comics were just a nightmare, and that they were only created to scare people in a non-traditional way. But we never are given any closure to these comic strips. After the final few panels of the Halloween story, the normal Garfield comics just carry on, which leads me to question if it really was a dream. But this is only the start of the Garfield rabbit hole. Things go much deeper. Here we have Garfield, His 9 Lives. This book, which was also a television special, goes through Garfield and his 9 lives as a cat. The Garfield that we see in the comics is in his 8th life, while the final 9th one is more of a sneak peek into the next one. This book contains some really strange concepts in it. One story shows Garfield reconnecting to a primal version of himself, and attacking his owner. The most thought-provoking portion of the book, though, is the introduction, where the god of the Garfield universe explains his vision of what a cat should be, emphasizing that a cat should have 9 lives. And when we finally get a glimpse of what this god looks like, we see a familiar figure. That's right, the god of the Garfield universe is Garfield. Now the question becomes, was Garfield created in the image of God? Or did Garfield somehow transcend and become God? This can tie back to the theory that Garfield is living in a fantasy world. The god Garfield could just be a part of his mind, his subconscious perhaps, keeping up the illusion and controlling his mind and memories. And the normal Garfield could just be his conscious mind. And if you're looking for an explanation for all the Eldritch Garfield pictures, well, there you go. It's because Garfield is God. It could also just be a funny comic about an orange cat. That's definitely a possibility.